All
right, welcome everyone tonight to the Snowshoeing preseason webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, please hold them till the end just so we can make sure that we get through the entire presentation here. If there's any that come to mind that you don't want to forget during it, please feel free to put them in chat. Steve Bennett will be monitoring that and we will get to them as soon as we can. So on the call tonight, we have Ron Freeman, who is the Snowshoeing Venue Director. Trish Miles, I believe, will be joining us if she's not already. She's one of many great members on the management team that we have for snowshoeing. Myself, the sports director. I used to be the sports director for Alpine. With Zach Cintron's transition to the IUS program and the addition of our newest sports director, Ben. I'm now over here with this crew, so happy to be here. Thankful for Ron and everybody else getting me up to speed with what they can and looking forward to this year. Also on the call, Steve Bennett, the Senior Director of Sports and Competition, and then Mike Sarnowski, the Vice President of Sports. Looking over the agenda for tonight, we have our COVID protocols, which Mike will cover here after this slide. We'll go over some registration deadlines, the Winter Games dates and schedules. If you're not aware of that already, we'll go over the events that will be offered for this year, some Whitetail and Vail property updates, some info on housing, along with staging, go over the head coach certifications, along with the coaches training that's coming up, some on-snow tips, general rules and competition reminders. And at the end of this, we will have our Q&A, and post the end of this slide deck, there's probably 15, 20 slides with a bunch of additional resources that are not necessary to cover here currently, but are great to refer to if you have any questions about documents or stuff like that. At this time, I will pass it over to Mike to cover the updated protocol information.
Okay, thank you. And just to reassure everyone, yes, this is the snowshoeing preseason webinar. There was a missed edit on the previous slide. So as all of you, I'm sure, are aware, we are still in the midst of a pandemic and are operating as best we can in those situations. Maryland, and this is a credit to all of you and all of the other coaches and athletes and family members out there. Maryland is one of the states that's been able to have much more activity live and in person compared to many other states. There's some states, Steve was sharing a conversation he had with one of our colleagues last week. They, to date, have not had anything in person yet. Which is, that's, tragic for their athletes, but it also drives home the point that I know things are still kind of challenging out there, and we do need to follow our protocols and such. This batch of protocols, they were updated significantly in at the beginning or middle of September, and then we made some additional tweaks just last week on this. So if you have not been coaching any sports for a bit, this may be new, or there may be some changes here. So we want to be sure that everyone's aware of it. One of the things, so we have the three different categories of risk that we operate under. And there are, on the next couple slides, we'll see after we go through this here, there are set protocols or requirements. Just think of the word protocol as meaning requirement that we need to follow. These are, in essence, non-negotiable. It's one of those things that if we can't operate, or if your individual program can't operate under these requirements, then it's not ready for your program to come up to be participating. Same thing goes for some individual athletes, and that's a tough thing. But some of our athletes may not be ready to participate under the requirements that we need to operate under. But it's basically we either operate under these requirements or we don't have things in person. Should also say that all of this is with the opening, as Jeff Abel puts it all the time, of at this time, this is the requirement. We think things have stabilized a bit in terms of the changing requirements. or at least the structure of that. We don't anticipate major changes, but you never know. There could be some significant changes. So anyway, we've got three different categories of risk that we operate under. And again, we'll see the different breakouts. Low risk is when the COVID rate in our state, and we go statewide for the most part, with one exception I'll note in a moment. So if statewide, our COVID rate is 10 or fewer new cases per day per 100,000 people, and that's averaged over a 7-day period, we are in low risk. The other possibility to get into low risk is we could, there could be a higher incidence than 10 per, but if 80% or more of the participants in your program are fully vaccinated, then you can be categorized as, or you can be operating at low risk. And I should also say, so that I see some people may be jotting stuff down, these will be sent out to you within the next 24 hours or so and such. And then they're also available on the coach resource page and the protocol or the return to activity. I don't believe the protocol that may be up there at the moment does not have the couple changes related to snowshoeing and alpine skiing yet. That's getting updated, and that'll be posted in the next couple days, but everything else is pretty much the same. There's really no difference. So that's the low risk. And again, we'll talk what that means. Moderate risk, or the mid-range, is 11 to 15 new cases per 100,000 over the 7-day average, and also not having 80% or more fully vaccinated. And then the significant risk. This is where there's more than 15 new cases per 100,000 per day. And again, you haven't hit that 80% fully vaccinated. There's one exception with that 80% fully vaccinated, and that is, as is noted, it's not noted there, but if your area, your county has a COVID rate of more than 50 or 50 or higher, and at the moment, as of yesterday, or as of this morning, I guess, we have 3 counties that are in that category. If you are at 50 new cases per 100,000 per day or higher, you can't use the 80% vaccination to move down into low risk. If you're at 50 cases or higher, you are in significant risk until until it drops below 50 cases. At the moment, Special Olympics Maryland, as a state, is operating under significant risk because we are at, I think it's 20.2 was the most recent number with that. Now, if your individual program has the high vaccination rate, as is noted, then you can be operating in the green still with that, with the exception of the 3 counties that are above 50. And those 3 counties currently, and that's today that we're tracking it, are Garrett County, Washington County, and Caroline County on the shore. Everybody else is below 50. So question comes up, how do I know what our current rate is or what our statewide rate is? We have posted now on our coach resource page. Hopefully you're all familiar with that. The link is there, a section with the current COVID risk level. And it also indicates the any counties that are above that 50 cases per 100,000 that are in that case there. In addition, there are links there to a 2-page quick guide. You'll actually see that in here, as well as to the most recent full protocol that's there. So you have that. If there's any question, you can always go to that, to the coach resource page, as we're hoping people do as a main resource. So Ryan, why don't we go to the next slide and we can look at the different, I'm not going to read through all of this. A couple things to keep in mind. When you look down here, you see the second line, additional forms across the board. Everybody needs to have a communicable disease waiver completed, or a CDW. When we were operating a year ago, and you may have done some training for snowshoeing, there was a different form that I think it was a acknowledgement of risk is what it was called. That form is no longer being used. Everyone has to have this communicable disease waiver. It's good for 3 years and such. I'm not going to go into the details of screening, but if you're in the low risk category, you don't need to be screening people. If you're in the moderate risk, you do need to be screening just verbally. You don't have to do a temperature check. And then if you're in the significant risk in the orange category, you do have to do the screening, you do have to do the temperature check, and you have to complete the rosters and submit them to us so that we can track that. The same thing across the board in all three categories. If someone has a positive COVID test, they can't participate for 10 days. And then another, after they have the positive test, and 7 of those days have to be without symptoms. And any athlete or unified partner needs to get medical clearance to come back into the sport. Masking, you can see there. One of the things to note with the masking, even in the green, even in the low risk, anybody who is not fully vaccinated needs to be wearing a mask at all times, except when they're involved with exercise. It says rigorous exercise, but in exercise. And what we count as that is once you start your warm-ups in your training program, if we're talking about your training program, once you start your warm-ups, they can take their mask off. Once you finish, do your cool downs, they need to put it back on. Excuse me. That's only folks who are not vaccinated. If we get into the moderate risk or the significant risk, that applies to everybody, whether you're vaccinated or not. So everyone would need to be wearing masks, except when they're involved directly in that exercise or their activity. So let's look at the next slide. Then similarly, we'll highlight just a couple things here. For low risk category, you should try to distance, but it's not essential. It's not a requirement there, but just take measures to stay distancing. And when we say distancing, we're talking social distancing of 6 feet or more. If we're in moderate or significant risk, yellow or orange, you need to maintain distancing at all times. Doesn't really apply that much to snowshoeing in terms of with the competition, but for example, if we're talking about a team sport like basketball or soccer or whatever, really you can only have a real game, if you will, when you're in the low risk category. Transportation across the board, if it's transportation that is provided or arranged, coordinated by Special Olympics, then they need to wear masks throughout. When everybody in the vehicle needs to wear masks. And when we say coordinate, if you put together a carpool, if you as a representative of Special Olympics are doing anything to make that happen, then that counts as coordinated by or provided by Special Olympics, and we need to follow that. Accommodations. So, and actually this has been updated, and we did not get it here on the slide. Basically, to stay overnight, you must be vaccinated at this point. So this has been updated there. So we will get that corrected before we send the slides out. So yeah, with any kind of accommodations, anything provided by Special Olympics Maryland must be vaccinated. And if we ever get into the orange and we're in the orange category, then overnight accommodations are not permitted. Spectators, it varies. If we're in the low risk category, and it's because we're actually 10 or fewer cases per 100,000, then we can have spectators without much issue. If it's in the 10 or fewer because of 80% being vaccinated, then we need to keep spectators separated. And the reason behind that is that we're not set up to track spectator vaccination rates at every event. We will do that in some very unique situations, but we're not prepared to do that across the board. And having them there in that general area can affect that 80% percentage and such. If we're at the moderate risk in the yellow, then spectators need to stay separated from the delegations or from the other activity. Those of you who have been to most of our events, let's not count bowling for the moment, but if you were at any of the fall sports or golf or kayaking, etc., we had the spectators separated physically. There was a designated spectator area. That's that moderate risk there. In the significant risk category, where we're in the orange, spectators are not permitted. And using bowling as an example, coming back to that, we were in the significant risk category, but also because of space availability and such being indoors and such, we had to make the difficult decision of not allowing spectators. We don't anticipate at this point happening in related to winter games. And then meals, less so much of an issue. We can deal with that when we get to winter games and such. Let's go to the next slide. So I saw someone was asking a question about vaccination. So this was a sort of a two-stage change. We added in at the request of and with the input of area leaders a vaccination requirement for some activities and some sports back in September, and then similarly based on input from area leaders, we made the decision last week before we started having these the preseason webinars to make a similar change and require vaccination for some aspects of alpine skiing and snowshoeing. So for these sports that you see there, the team sports and then the individual sports you see there, anyone who is attending any multi-area event or competition. So the on snow training days count as an event, a multi-area event. We have athletes or participants coming from multiple areas. And of course, winter games, if you're coming to winter games. I don't know that anybody is hosting any multi-county competitions for our snow sports, but it would apply to them as well. But in those situations, everyone involved with snowshoeing would need to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated. And when we say fully vaccinated, that means a minimum of 2 weeks after the last shot of your initial requirement. Yes, we know boosters are all in and so on down the line. There's not any definitive note on when the timing on boosters and so on that we can actually build a policy around and operate around. So if you've gotten your first 2 shots, or the individual has gotten their first 2 shots of Pfizer or Moderna, and it's 2 weeks after that last shot, then they are fully vaccinated. They count for this. If there are if it's a Johnson & Johnson or a Johnson & Johnson or a Janssen webinar. And Kelly, if we could ask you to not be using the annotations. Let me see if we can turn off that annotation there. There we go. Thank you. But anyhow, Johnson & Johnson or the Janssen vaccine, it's 2 weeks after that one shot. And again, the impact of the booster afterwards is not factored into that, though we are tracking it. Should also say, you're not counted as fully vaccinated for our purposes unless you provide, or the individual provides, proof of that vaccination, typically a photocopy or a picture, whatever, a scan of their vaccination card. And we'll track that. We don't share that publicly. We do share that on a need-to-know basis. So your area leaders have that access to that information, and your coaches have access to that information. But otherwise, just as the information within a given person's medical form, for example, we don't share publicly. We keep it on a need-to-know basis. So what this means for snowshoeing participants, someone who is not fully vaccinated can participate in your training program. If you're doing stuff, outside or even an indoor, whatever, they can do that if you wish. You can allow that, but they would not be able, if they're not fully vaccinated, they would not be able to attend the on snow days that we're having at Whitetail Resort or winter games. Okay, both because we're requiring it for snowshoeing, and also as I noted before, vaccination is required for overnight accommodations. Not that everybody who goes to winter games stays overnight. Okay, next slide. And then this just lists some individual sports where vaccination requirements are not in play. We're including it here just so you have all the information. We're not going to go into this. Next slide. And again, you'll get all these slides later. This again is for team sports and skills included here, so you have the full batch. But go to the next slide. I think it's that one. Okay, so when we're talking about individual sports, if it is the case that Special Olympics Maryland is requiring vaccination for multi-sport events or multi-sport activities or the state competition, as we are for snowshoeing, your area can decide, if it wishes, to also require it for their training program. So that, and that it's mostly from a logistical standpoint, particularly if we get into team sports or anything that has relays, for example, having some people who can go to competition and some who can't just becomes a little bit of a nightmare trying to map all that out. So the area has that choice if they wish to. That is your area directors or your area leadership's decision. That is not your decision that you can make independently as a coach. Certainly, I'm sure your area leaders, your area director would be happy to chat with you if that is something that you want to discuss, but that is not a decision that you as a coach can make independently. It must be made by the area director to move forward. And your area director, if they have any question with that, can certainly talk with me, can talk with Jeff Abel, who's the VP of local programs and such. So let's go to the next slide. That's just what's locally popular sports, so similar content. We can go past that. This is the first of the 2 pages of that 2-page quick guide that summarizes pretty quickly the information that we just shared. There is a PDF downloadable version of this on the coach resource page that you can go and you can grab. I don't know if it's something you want to print and distribute, but it's certainly something you could if you wish to. But it covers a lot of the information that we've got and we've talked about here. Let's go to the next slide. And then here that summarizes the different accommodations and so on down the line. Should also, I think I said this, but if I didn't, it's worth repeating. When we're talking about the vaccinations or anybody with the requirements and so on, we are talking about everyone in your delegation, not just athletes and unified partners, but every coach, every volunteer, every athlete, every partner, everybody who's involved with your program. If they are coming to the on snow training, or if they are coming to the winter games, they must be vaccinated and must have turned in their proof of vaccination in order to participate in that. Okay. I forget what the next slide is, whether this is a good pause. So actually back up just a second. Steve, were there any questions that we didn't already cover in the related to vaccinations or related to the protocol?
No, but I haven't seen any come through the chat at this time, Mike, that we haven't already addressed. Thank you.
We haven't addressed. Great. Okay. And again, a lot of this stuff you needs to little sit in. I'll be here for the duration of the session. But great. And again, it's a little different. Not everybody may be able to participate at this point. We are thrilled that we have somewhere in the neighborhood, at least for the fall sports, of 75% of the number of people who participated, athletes who participated in 2019, the last time we had anything close to a regular season. We're at 75% of the participation level from there for fall community sports. So we're really happy we're able to do it. It shows it can be done. It also shows not everybody is ready for it. It's not 100% or more, and that's okay. There's nothing to be upset about if you all aren't ready or some of your athletes aren't ready. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, John, I'd love to know how you got more than 130%, but that's great. I know that they give it their all. So
I only started with 8, so it's a small base.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was 130% of them are vaccinated. I was going to say
No, 100. I was comparing it to your 75%.
75. That's great. That's fantastic. So yeah, actually have grown, and that
Yes.
some other areas have had that similar experience. So anyway, so it can be done. It just needs to operate within these protocols or requirements. So I want to shift gears slightly, but it's related. Just want to talk a minute about the requirements for participation, because we've had some little challenges, I think, over the last 4 or 5 months, and want to be sure that we're resetting and we're back on track here. In case it's not clear, no athlete can participate in Special Olympics activities in any way, shape, or form without an up-to-date, valid medical form. Now, also, they need to have a communicable disease waiver as well. Similarly, no volunteer can participate. Volunteer coach, partner, general volunteer, anything without having all of their certifications up to date. They can't start, they don't get a 2-week waiver or a 2-day waiver of getting, having their medical turned in or whatever. They don't start without it. And that's tough to communicate sometimes and not pleasant, but it's also something that's absolutely essential. And there are no exceptions. No athlete can participate without that medical. One of the things that we've had challenges with, I think, in the fall was around the communicable disease waiver. And it appeared that they were not all getting captured before people started participating. And it is absolutely essential that they do so. Similarly, not getting their vaccination information in and so on. And we realize those are 2 new things that are being required. We don't underestimate that there isn't an impact on that in terms of the amount of work that's required. We're dealing with it on our end as well, but it's absolutely essential. And it's the only way that we can operate. Let's go to the next slide. This is a similar one, or a familiar one rather. Work with your area leadership. We're going to share some dates that it's the same structure as we've had before. But those are the dates that things have to be here at headquarters. Your area needs to have them. The person who is submitting them for your area needs to have them at some point before then. They're going to determine what that is. It's based on what their availability is and their bandwidth to get stuff done. So if you haven't already started talking with your area leadership and who's handling that, you should be doing that now. And if you don't know who it is that you need to talk to in your area, contact your area director, and he or she can, maybe him or her, but he or she can direct you to the right person. Let's go to the next slide. Everything here, again, athletes need the medical form, so on down the line. These are the forms that everyone needs, or the certifications that everyone needs based on their level. In addition, is the communicable disease waiver across the board. Everybody must have that. And then in addition, as is noted in that little red box there, for some sports and events, there's also the requirement to be fully vaccinated for participation in certain multi-activity or multi-sport things. That is, again, that'll vary by sport. So it does apply to snowshoeing and such. Also noted there, if anything is missing or if they need to get anything, all links to all the forms or the certifications, etc., are available on the coach resource page. Let's go to the next slide. This is familiar. It's a similar thing focused around the coaching advancement and such. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time or much time on this, but because this should be familiar. But again, it's that none of that has changed other than we're enforcing it now in terms of no one's recognized as a coach unless they meet the requirements. But the only other change there is that CDW, which you should see at the bottom of each of the lists there. And then again, of course, there may be the vaccination requirement in some cases. Let's go to the next slide. So training, so these are the different registration deadlines. The training registration deadline, which is January 7th, that's when your area needs to have into us in GMS. And you have someone who handles this for you. Everyone who is participating in your program in snowshoeing, they need to be registered in GMS, such as our computer database, and they need to be registered, again, as training in snowshoeing. That establishes the people who are eligible, potentially, if they meet the other requirements, to participate in the state championship or the state competition, in this case, Winter Games. Anyone who joins or gets their name added after January 7th is certainly welcome to participate in training, but they will not be eligible to go on to Winter Games. We are holding fast to these deadlines. Part of the challenge, I think, that contributed to some of the problems we have with getting forms in and such, which are, I know forms, paperwork, it's dull. It's absolutely essential to running an organization of this size. But we have been flexible and such, and I think that may have contributed as well to some of the problems with getting stuff in. So we are holding fast to these dates and these deadlines. January 7th, need to have everybody who's participating in training in GMS. Then by the 14th, we need to have, if there are any forms that had not been turned into headquarters, again, they wouldn't have started training if you didn't have them in your hand. If you don't have a copy of it, then they don't start training. But anything that then is not already at headquarters and valid through March 1st needs to be into us at headquarters by January 14th. So it's athlete medicals and their CDW. For coaches, partners, and volunteers, it's their application, it's their protective behaviors, and it's the CDW. For volunteers, or coaches and sports volunteers, it's also the concussion certification. And for coaches, it's their sports certification. For snowshoeing, if they're going to go to any kind of the training dates or the winter games, that's also the date by which we need to have the proof of full vaccination in January 14th. And then also because that date is after the first training date, if they are attending, if someone is attending the training date or the on-snow training date on January 8th, we need to have all their forms in hand by the 5th so that we know that we've got everybody who's coming, we know we've got all their forms in hand. So again, work with your area. You don't have to wait, or they don't have to wait until January 14th to send these in. They can get them in now. Dottie Rush, who processes these on our end, is around and is processing them. So get them in, and that avoids the huge rush at the end. But again, if they are participating on the 8th, if we don't have their forms by everything in and up to date by January 5th, they won't be able to participate on snow training day. And then we have the competition registration deadline. That's after the second training date, so that you have an opportunity, the second on snow training date. So you have the opportunity to potentially factor that in terms of what events they should be in and so on down the line. So let's see. Yeah, the two things down at the bottom, just talk to your area, and then on the right, the deadlines are the deadlines, and we will not. I mean, it would have to be something really extreme. The example I gave to another group was, I don't know if anybody's from Charles County. Several years ago, Charles County had a fire that burned down the office they were using and stored everything. That's a pretty unique, rare, an extreme situation that we would look at making some type of an accommodation. Hopefully we're not encountering anything ever like that again, but it's that level of extreme situation we're talking about. Not, oh, he forgot to bring it to practice. Doesn't cut it. This is just a reminder of the coach requirements. The thing on here as a reminder is your coach sports certification, which is right about in the middle there. That requires the completion of coaching Special Olympics athletes. Only have to take it once. It's not something, the CSOA or coaching Special Olympics athletes course doesn't expire. Your certification might expire, but the course, you don't have to take that every 3 years. But that is required if you were sort of grandfathered or grandparented in as we were rolling out this the certification structure several years ago. Any kind of grandfathering or grandparenting in is expired at this point, and you have to take, if you haven't taken CSOA, you've got to do it. That's the only way you're going to renew your certification. And then some other stuff, and I think Ryan and Ron will touch base or touch on the coach training that's coming up and the opportunities for that. That's specific to the sport of snowshoeing. Let's go to the next slide. I think this is the last one for me. So where can you find this information? We have recently launched in the last couple months, again, on the coach resource page, a certification status update. In fact, all of these reports were updated within the last 2 hours on that site. So there is, on the main coach resource page, a searchable PDF for athletes that has their medical expiration and their CDW expiration. It's right there. There's a PDF of that. There's a PDF for the non-athletes as well. And then there's a downloadable Excel file that includes both of those. Notice that does not include vaccination because we're not sharing that. That is, again, something we want to keep to on a need-to-know basis. And this is all open to the public. They can download it. They can access this. But again, your area leadership can access that. We'll also look at another way to get some stuff out to folks in the next week or so. Then also, so you can get to that. That has the most recent dates. It has everything in there that's been processed through about 4 o'clock this afternoon. And again, we'll be updating that. It's not every day. We'll be updating that every two weeks or so, assuming that there's been some stuff to process. Then also, if you're looking for the coach certification information, that's been up there for quite a while, for close to 2 years, 3 years now. But it's available on the coach education page that's listed there. There's a PDF of the coach certifications, the sports certifications, as well as sort of a transcript of everybody and the courses that they've taken. Your name, a coach, would only be included in there if they have taken a course, or if they have earned that, they would be get in the transcript thing, if they've had to have taken at least one course. And in order to be included on the sports certifications, they had to have earned at least one certification for that. If they don't, unfortunately, the way that the database is set up, it would be way more cumbersome than we can do it to provide updates on a regular basis. So you've got that. And then for the additional information, you've got all the stuff that is noted above in the on the regular coach resource page. So I think that is it for me. Unless, Steve, are there any questions relevant to this section?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you much. And again, I will be hanging around, and if there's any questions at the end, we'll be happy to do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. Moving on to some key points for the Winter Games this year and next year, actually. So the dates, that's going to be February 27th, and that will go through March 1st. So you have Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. That will be at Whitetail Resort again this year. Some reminders here: all athletes and partners must participate on time trials on that 27th date. That's how we division for the following 2 days. So anybody who will be participating on Monday or Tuesday must attend the time trials date. That's not where anybody receives awards. That's solely for us to get times so we can division and prepare for the next 2 days. 3 individual events plus 1 relay is available for each day. We'll talk about this a little bit farther on, but once you kind of gauge which event your athlete will be doing, keep in mind you don't want them to be gassed throughout the day, so pick your events carefully. We'll also talk about what events are open to athletes. So for the events this year, you can see that all of them are the same from what we've offered in the past. We did talk about with the management team also possibly offering a 4x50 meter relay, but that's still in the works to see. We will send out a survey to see if there is any interest in that race. And if so, we would like to provide that as an opportunity. That may not be a race where, since it's not a sanctioned event, we do receive an award, but we do want to offer that opportunity if any athlete is interested in competing in the race.
Ryan, if we offer this, if there's enough interest in it, this would be for the athletes who are ineligible for the 4x100 and certainly the 4x400 relay. Just an opportunity for those athletes to run in a relay. So, it's not open to, all athletes. It's open to those who are ineligible for the 4x1.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we'll talk about here. So snowshoeing athletes may compete in up to 3 individual events plus 1 relay each day. But as a reminder here, athletes in the 25-meter race can only be entered into the 50-meter race. Athletes in the 50-meter race can only enter the 25-meter race or the 100-meter race. Then lastly here, athletes in the 50-meter race may only enter the 4x100-meter race if they're also entered in the 100-meter race. So like we talked about before, as a coach, just be smart about which events your athletes will be participating in, just so they're not worn out completely during the day there. Days of events will be sent out mid-January. We kind of base that off the interest for each event. As we get closer, then we can start to finally make that schedule to get that in the event guide and send out to everyone else. So for the events here, in order to participate in a relay, the athlete and partner must train for that relay with their team throughout the season. We can't have at the last minute It'd be a different team, so please make sure that partner is with that athlete for the duration of the season, so they get used to it. With the 800-meter unified race, athletes and partners are to run as a tandem pair. And with that, each person must finish within 5 seconds of one another. If they're not within that 5 seconds, they will be DQ'd. That total is based on a combined time of both the athlete and the partner. And that will get us the official time for that team. The athlete and partner may hold hands. We just have to make sure the partner or athlete is not carrying or pulling the other person. If that is the case, that will disqualify both athletes. So here you can see the pretty picture of Whitetail Resort, the lunch and the food court over on that side, per usual there. So if you enter up the steps and you take a right, that's our main entrance for the most part. As you can see on that diagram on the bottom there, registration, control center, and volunteer registration. To get to that, you go under that little overpass, you take a right through those doors. Signage will direct you, but you'll kind of take a right through that food court area, and there's these steps that lead you up to those rooms. If you're unfamiliar with that, it will be the same setup as this time for on snow training. So you'll get used to that location and familiar with how everything is set up there.
And Ryan, this is Steve. Just to, as Ryan said, at this time, we're still in talks with Whitetail with different layout possibilities, et cetera, for winter games. But as those details become available, we'll let you know if anything changes.
So here are two different locations to be aware of. The time trials competition location will be near the top of that snow tubing area. You can see the start and finish line there. That is where we'll have time trials. We don't have, Whitetail's thankfully able to block off that area for us at the bottom for Monday and Tuesday. And that's already a big ask. So we're thankful to have that location to ourselves. But for time trials, we will be operating up top there to get people's times. Not sure if that little building, it's kind of like a hut at the bottom of that picture. We do have an area that we also do awards down at the bottom of that snow tubing area. It's a pretty nice setup for anybody who's never seen it before. We kind of have a little area separate from the ski teams up on the other side. At this time, I'll pass it over to Ron for a little bit to cover some sport-specific information.
Thanks, Ryan. For the next, 11 or 12 slides, for the folks who have been at Snowshoe in the past, you're not going to see things here that we haven't seen before, just some reminders of the general rules of snowshoeing. Here you'll see a description of the size of snowshoes, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the coaches training tomorrow night. Poles are optional, and let's just move on to the next slide, right? For races longer than 100 meters, and that will be obviously the 200, 400, 800, 1500 will have mass starts. Everything else will be in lanes. We will mark off pretty wide lanes to give everybody some flexibility. 2 command starts, so you want to have your athletes practice with racers ready and go, so they're hearing the same thing in practice that they will hear at both the time trials and at games. The rules are, and we'll emphasize this at the start line, the start of the race, your athletes' tips of your snowshoes must be behind the starting line, and we'll be using a waterfall start for all races that go around curves. Next slide. 2 false starts is a DQ, and it's when an athlete significantly moves any body part for the start signal. We are certainly aware of weather conditions, wind, and any number of other things that are going on. And we will be tolerant of, and we'll be cognizant of the fact that sometimes things are just out of the athlete's ability to hold still. But in reality, you need to hold as still as possible. So you want to practice that as well. Next slide. 2-minute rule. This we run into every now and again. An athlete must progress at least 20 meters every 2 minutes in any race longer than 100 meters. If an athlete falls, has difficulty with equipment, or leaves the course, he or she or they have 2 minutes to correct. This will also be true in, we didn't mention it, we'll probably not mention it in the past, for the 800-meter unified race. If an athlete falls, that athlete needs to get up on his own. He can't be dragged up by his partner or pulled or dug that way. We talk about leading the athlete, but that also has to do with an athlete falling. And last on this issue, on this slide, an athlete may not progress more than 3 meters without both snowshoes on feet. That includes across the finish line. You have to have your shoes on your feet when you cross the finish line, whether you lose them at 1 meter, a half meter, or whatever. They need to be on your feet. Okay, next slide. This is for time trials only. When we do time trials up in the mountain area, our terrain is different than it is for the games. So we'll have some, hopefully, we'll have snow this year and enough ability to practice up on the operations area. But for, if you remember from a couple of years ago, or probably 3 years ago, 50-meter races, time trials will be relatively straight. 100 meters will have a slight dog leg and a slight uphill. And the races, the 400-meter race, which will be our time trial for several of the longer distance, have an out and back, and that has some significant hills. So hopefully you'll get your athletes, if you can, out on, if you're out there on Sunday, to get a little bit of practice time if we have snow and the ability to use that area of the course. But your athletes, would behoove them to be able to practice not only going uphill, but also racing downhill. Next slide. If you recall, I'm not sure how many years we've done the competition at in the tubing area. I think 3. We put together a 200-meter course, and we will have a little bit of extension for the 100 meters. So that's all flat on the close side of the track. Everything else will be going all the way around the track. So 200 meters obviously will be once around, and for all those who are proficient in math, the 400 will be twice around, and go on. I'm not as proficient as I used to be. But when we talked about the 4x50 race, this, if we, if that's something that we find we'll have a sufficient number of teams to provide, we'll have exchange zones around around a 200-meter loop that will be much more in line with what we do at the track for a 4x100. Okay, next slide. Just as a reminder, the snowshoers finish a race when his torso reaches the vertical plane of the finish line. And that's not his arms extended forward, that's not his snowshoes. And like I said and emphasized earlier, the snowshoes must be on their feet when crossing the finish line. Next slide, Ryan. For the relays, and we'll talk about this tomorrow night for those of you who are on the training tomorrow night. We'll be showing a little video of a relay on in our presentation tomorrow, where they are just slapping hands. We won't be doing that. We're going to be executing like we do at the track. We'll have a batons, actually the same batons that we use at the track. So for your relay teams, practice with batons, because we will not be slapping hands when you hit the exchange zone. You want to, in all things that we're doing for practice, as best as you can, whether you're on snow or on grass or on sand, whatever, practice like we're going to be doing in competition. The exchange zone, I'm not sure what we did 2 years ago on the track. I don't know, 2015 rules, the exchange zone changed from 20 meters and a 10-meter fly zone to a 30-meter exchange zone. And I honestly can't remember if we made a 30-meter or 20-meter exchange zone for snowshoeing. What I do remember is hardly any athletes, if any, were doing a running start or fly zone kind of start for their exchange. Anyway, we will be providing, our marshals will be providing assistance. We'll place your athletes in the middle of the exchange zone. And if you train them to either be at the front or the back, that will be up to the athlete to move there. Next slide. The rules for exchanges, virtually the same as at the track. The athlete who drops a baton, if that happens in the exchange zone, needs to be the athlete who picks it up and exchanges it. There can't be one athlete dropping it and the next athlete picking it up for it to be a valid exchange. And I just mentioned a couple seconds ago, our officials and marshals will place the athletes in the center of the exchange zone. They're not required to stay there. That's just what we can do because we don't know where you're having them. If you would like, depending on the relative speed, you might have somebody at the beginning of the exchange zone or the end of the exchange zone. That will be up to them to move after the marshal has placed them in the center of the zone. Next slide. Relay for competitors. If you don't have, we will not be running relays if you have 3 athletes and you say, can this person run 2 legs? That's not a valid relay. So each competitor must complete 1/4 of the distance, and unified relays, 2 Special Olympics athletes and 2 unified partners, you can run them in any order. Okay, next slide. A little bit different than the track, only the head coach from a delegation may file a protest, and they'll be given to either Ryan or I, and we will rule on the protest. The protest, and we'll talk about this tomorrow night, is just if you as a coach has noticed a rule violation. If it's a judgment call, that's not that's not something we will rule on for a protest. A reminder, we'll go over this at the pre-competition webinar as well. Coaching throughout a race is not permitted. You can go out there in the visitors area, in the spectator area to encourage, but no coaching, no pacing your athletes, or any such things like that gives an advantage to one athlete over another. Next, and I believe my last slide, here are the rules and the things that the officials are looking for in terms of disqualifications. Improperly overtaking or impeding another competitor, or in any way interfering with another competitor. Now, our races of 100 meters and 50s and 25s, we will be in lanes. An athlete leaving a lane and somehow running in another person's lane, if in the judgment of the official is not impeding that other athlete, that's not necessarily a DQ. It's only when they're impeding for races in lanes. Okay, we'll move on past that. Leaving the course's designation leaving the designated course is a DQ. 2 false starts, improper exchange on a relay, 2-minute rule, not progressing more than 3 meters without both snowshoes, crossing the finish line without shoes on their feet, and receiving physical assistance at any time during the race are all valid reasons for DQs. So to the best of your ability, explain this to your athletes. So, and we will do the same. If an athlete has been DQ'd, we will talk to the athlete, we will talk to the coach and explain exactly the reason for the disqualification. And I believe that's my last slide, Ryan.
Yes, Ron, thank you very much for covering that. Just thought about this here, impeding another competitor. There was one coach that submitted they wanted some more information about that during the coaches training. If there is anything that comes to mind, please send it to me ideally before the end of the night, just so we can make sure that's covered. Outside of that, we haven't received any additional content suggestions, but if you have any, please send them over. All right, so for some upcoming dates here, January 8th will be our first on snow training. There was some conflicting information about it being on the 15th. We will not talk about the 15th anymore. That was a tentative date that had to be changed now to the 8th. So January 8th will be our first coaches training or on snow training. The second one will be February 12th, both taking place at Whitetail Resort. Below there, you'll see the coaches pre-competition webinar, which will be February 23rd at 7 p.m. That link will be sent out along with this slide deck and some other content tomorrow for you to register for. On snow training, we talked about those dates. Each area may bring up to 5 to 6 athletes to demo techniques or train, but we may cut that off at a total of 40. We will be sending out a survey monkey per usual to see who's interested in bringing athletes and how many. We have a form typically that we send out to check what that interest is that you'll submit to me, and also so I can make sure that we have the correct amount of lunches, et cetera, there. The registration link currently is on the coaches resource page for snowshoeing. That will be sent out tomorrow also. Alpine's doing something similar, but we have a little less information we have to capture. Ours is more solely for who's coming, and so we can move on from there. As a note at the bottom here, all competitors should try to have a minimum of 3 on snow training opportunities prior to the Winter Games. We don't want athletes competing for the first time at Whitetail. So please stress to your athletes the importance of attending that just so they can be up to speed with everything for the competition. So for the registration process, please work with your area GMS person for specific dates for which they must receive their information, like Mike talked about before. That may vary from county to county, but please abide by that. The training registration, which will be early in January, all programs must have their athletes registered. The date was talked about previously that you can refer to. They must be registered as training and snowshoeing to be eligible to participate in the on-snow training Winter Games. Competition registration, which will become in late January, establishes participants attending Winter Games, as we talked about. And later on, the events and the teams must be designated at that time also. With chaperones and the head of delegations, they are the only additional delegation members allowed to be added to this stage. So more with this registration process, athletes and unified partners must participate in time trials on Sunday to compete. Again, that's how we get the times, so we can division. They must be in attendance for time trials to compete for Winter Games. Event changes may be submitted following time trials. The paperwork requirements we talked about. If you have any issues filling out this paperwork or have a new member on your team that needs to fill out the paperwork, I'm happy to walk through that with them over Zoom or whatever is needed. But again, that can all be found on the coaches resource page. I think everybody's certifications were last updated November 13th on there and is every month. So please double check with that. If you can't find it or have a question, reach out to me and I will answer it for you. Some general resources, again, please reference that coaches resource page. We work hard to keep it updated, so all your questions, general questions are at least answered. So please refer to that. Again, this slide deck along with other information will be posted on that page coming tomorrow, along with going straight to your inbox. You can directly go to the snowshoeing portion of the website using that link below. But if you're just looking for the CDW forms where an individual stands, that will be that main link up top there. All right, so who to contact if you have a question. If you have a question related to snowshoeing, that would be myself. The email for anybody that may be trying to access is listed below here. Ben President, our new sports director in charge of Alpine. If you have any questions related to them, if you happen to email me about an Alpine question, which has happened, no problem at all. I'll either help answer it for Ben or send it to Ben. We'll work together to get the answer for you there. And then Melissa Enger for any other information regarding other sports that she covers at least. So at this time, we'll open it up. Is there any questions, comments, concerns at this time?
I have one. This is Katie
Yes.
from Anne
Yes,
Arundel.
Katie.
You said 3 events and 1 relay a day. In the past, it's always been three events and 1 relay for the whole time.
Okay, let me double check on that, Mike or Steve, unless you know the answer. Any?
Yeah, no, I think it is, you can be in up to 2 relays,
Right.
but they can't be on the same day. So yeah, I think Ron was working to try to get this sort of aligned, not that this is track, but aligned with the structure and track, so they could in theory be in up to 5 events.
Okay, because it said 3 events and 1 relay a day.
A day, yeah, the 1 a day applies to the relay. So it's
Okay.
3 individual total,
Okay,
and then it just can't be, the issue is you can't be in 2 relays on the same day just because logistically it just doesn't work. And I think the way that
And-
it's set up, that shouldn't be an issue.
that's fine. I was interpreting it to mean 8 events during the weekend. And I knew that
Okay.
was quite a bit.
Yes, that we would love to be able to do that. I don't know if many athletes could handle that, particularly up at the 800 and 1600 distances. So
I think Elena would be pretty wiped out.
I better tell her to get training right away.
I have 2 quick questions. Are the protective behavior and the concussion certifications good for 3 years?
sorry, could you say that again, Larry?
Are the protective behavior and the concussion certifications good for 3 years?
They are good for 3 years, yes, from whenever they were last done. Yep.
Okay. And the second question was, if Maryland is in the high risk status, which you said it is right now for COVID, does that mean that there can be no overnights at the Winter Games?
So we're in the high risk status unless we have 80% or more fully vaccinated. We are requiring all alpine participants, all snowshoeing participants, all volunteers, all games management team members to be fully vaccinated. So we can have overnight stays there because we're meeting that there. Now, if Maryland goes to above 50, I don't think it's going to happen. Let's not go on wood, keep our fingers crossed that when we would be restricted again then where that vaccination wouldn't help us. But yeah, no, we're good to go at this point in time.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Thanks for helping us clarify that.
And I haven't seen any others coming through the chat line at this time either.
I do not either, Steve. As a reminder, we will have our coaches training tomorrow night at 7 p.m. That will be out. I just want to say thank you very much, not just for joining tonight, but for all your hard work. A lot goes into a typical season, let alone a season with COVID. So let's work together. It truly takes everybody to make this happen, but without coaches, volunteers, all of their hard work, we cannot run something as big as Special Olympics Maryland is without all of your hard work. So again, a solid over this weekend. It's very impressive with the few of you on here, how much work you put in. Let's work as a team. Let's make another great season happen. So thank you all very much for joining tonight. I will see many of you. I think there's 15 or so signed up for tomorrow now. Look forward to seeing as many people on tomorrow night with Ron, Trish, and I as possible. So thank you guys very much. You'll receive this information tomorrow. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thanks, Ryan.